Hi, this is Ned Siegfried from Siegfried and Jensen. As proud sponsors of BeliefCast, we hope you are inspired by Todd's weekly podcasts, which contain so many courageous stories of recovery and personal growth. Remember, it's not what happened in the past that matters, it's what happens in the future. We invite you all to work hard and be optimistic about your future. Enjoy today's podcast.
We are back. Thank you once again, everybody, for tuning in. This is Todd Sylvester with the Todd Inspires BeliefCast. I'm so excited today. We have an amazing person coming on. We are joined by the author of the Clarity Journal, and she's a coach, Becca Ribbing. Becca, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad we've connected. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Siegfried and Jensen, Wasatch Recovery, Veracity Networks, iHill Institute, and Living Recovery Interventions. And we also have a few silent sponsors, which I thought was really cool. They didn't want any recognition, but they have supported this. So thanks to you guys. We're ranked in the top 150 in mental health in the world, and we are just cranking. So thank you so much. And everybody who's tuning in week after week, thank you for all the support. I love you guys and can't thank you enough. So let me give you a little background on Becca. Again, like I said, she's the author of the Clarity Journal, which we're going to learn more about in our interview here today. She's been a coach for over a decade, and we're going to talk about that as well. But she's on a mission to help people break out of the cycle of uncertainty and the struggles that hold them back. She helps women going back and forth from the big, seemingly endless question of what to do next. Almost feels like we always got to do something more. What's the next big thing? Yeah. So I can't wait to get more into that. And again, she's just trying to, help people, find what they truly want and create the clarity of the moment they crave, and a bunch of other things we'll get into as well. I can't wait to talk about the mindful productivity and some other things. So Becca, I'd like to start off with you. If you could just maybe give us a little background. Where did you grow up, and tell us about your family a little bit?
So I grew up in a lot of different places. And when I tell people that, first question is, were you a military brat? And I was like, basically the exact opposite. My parents were kind of hippie-ish.
Okay.
So just had a bit of a wanderlust. So I was born in Chicago, and I've spent most of my life not most of my life, but the biggest chunk of my life has been spent in DC. But I lived there 3 different times. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And you're currently, I want to mention you're in Seattle right now, which is great. So thanks for tuning in. So did you like all that moving around as a kid, or did it bother you? I mean, some kids don't like it. Some kids like it.
I didn't necessarily like it in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I feel like it was really useful to me because it's helped me really feel secure wherever I am. I think that for some people, if they haven't moved, then moving can be scary, and it's never been scary for me either.
Okay. So are you a pretty outgoing person? Were you outgoing as a child as well?
I was not necessarily outgoing as a small child, but as I got older, I definitely became more and more outgoing. Maybe because I moved and I had to.
Well, and that's why I brought that up, Becca, is because I've interviewed some other people who have done a lot of moving like you when they were younger, and they almost had to become almost outgoing to get to know new friends and to put themselves out there, get a little vulnerable. And it, even though it was really difficult, it ended up being like a really big blessing for them. That's why I asked that question.
Yeah. I think I probably fit in that stereotype, but honestly, I didn't even know I did until you pointed it out.
Okay. Well, hey, we're learning something today, right? So tell us a little bit about, you moved around a lot, but what were you involved with when you got into maybe junior high and high school?
Oh, we're going to go down that rabbit hole. Let's see.
I wanted to be
no, I'm totally fine. I wanted to be an astronaut. I babysat a ton, sent myself to space camp multiple times, really wanted to be an astronaut. And then this last time I was at space camp, I realized there was no way I was ever going to pass like through the astronaut application process because
Right.
I have the worst motion sickness. And
Oh, yeah.
so like you
Not
can't
good.
even like get through to like the next stage. So I threw that plan out. And at the same time, I was then all of a sudden I was like, well, I don't need all these science classes. I'd already taken so many science classes that I didn't need them to graduate or anything. So I started taking a bunch of really cool classes. Like I took a poli-sci class in high school. I took a couple like contemporary history of various regions. I took a psychology class. And so when I went to college, I actually ended up majoring in foreign economic policy.
Interesting.
A complete shift.
Yeah. Wow.
And then I did what we all do. I graduated college and realized that's not what I wanted to do either.
Yeah, that happens pretty often, right?
Yep, it does. And so it was really funny because I was in that period of time trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I really threw myself into it. I read all the books. I did my Myers-Briggs type. I figured out what my Enneagram type was. Like I really took all of the assessments and also just read all of the books. And at the same time, my friends were all going through that exact same thing. You know, you graduate college, you think you know everything.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh no, that's not what I wanted. Or in your 20s, a lot of times it's more like I keep getting pigeonholed. How do I move to a better position? And so I started helping all my friends through this transition and realized I was really good at coaching. And that's how I ended up being a coach.
Wow. So what kind of coach are you? Like explain like what is your kind of like your modality and what's your typical client?
So I really like helping people figure out what they want to do with their lives. And when I say that, then I'm realizing, you know what? I like helping people figure out what they want to do for the next 3 years. Everyone is always growing and changing.
Yeah.
But I usually help people get out of difficult spots. So it either their career has taken a wrong turn and they want to move into something else, or they're not sure whether they want to move into something else. I really help them through that process and feel stronger about it. And then also help them like really implement it. Because when you're dealing with like a industry shift or a career shift, the language that you're so used to speaking in, you need to be able to shift that completely. So professionally, that's really like what in my coaching practice, that is predominantly the people I'm working with.
Yeah. It's interesting how it just kind of happened. You learned that you love helping your friends and helping them find some clarity and where they're headed and that kind of thing. So with that said, tell us the inspiration around the Clarity Journal and maybe explain to our listeners what that actually is.
So I will explain it by telling my story of it.
Please.
It kind of explains it well.
Yeah.
I was at another shift in my life. I had just had my second child and, the cute little bugaboo had the worst ear infections. And so for the first year and a half of his life, it was really difficult. Oh, he didn't like being put down. He was in pain. And so I really did what everyone does when they're in the middle of chaos. And, I let go of a lot of things, just trying to keep my head above water. And so that was fine for that period of time. But when I got back into life, when I was able to like work full time again, when, I was just feeling better because my son was feeling better.
Yeah.
It's really funny when that shift happens because a lot of times you start feeling stuck. You were stuck the whole time. But when things start getting better, you realize things aren't quite right, but you're not necessarily completely sure what you should be doing next. And so I hit that point and I was going back and forth with a friend of mine about where I should move from there. Like I was still coaching, but I had really let go of a lot. And like, how did I want it to look in the future? And as I was talking to my friend, she's lovely, wonderful, but she really stopped me and said, Becca, you're a coach. How would you help someone through this? Because you do this every day.
Yeah.
I laughed I wanted to kill her.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I got off the call really quickly and I wrote down every question I could think of that I had used to help my clients move forward, like things that helped them get out of their ruts.
Okay.
And because when we are stuck, we often are in a rut of thinking, like we aren't looking at the problem from outside ourselves. We're usually telling ourselves the same things and asking ourselves the same questions over and over again, or we're avoiding it.
Yeah.
And so I wrote down, I think the first day I wrote down 30 questions that I had thought of, and I started going and writing them down, like actually doing them for myself. And as I was doing them for myself, I realized how powerful it was just to get out of my own head and have those questions presented.
Yeah.
And I realized I was really onto something. And so it took me a while longer to actually get it out in book format. But as I refined it, and honestly, as I edited it, because every time I edited this book, I ended up going back through and doing the questions yet again for myself, or at least the ones that spoke to me. And I think that having those questions are just so powerful because you have the aha moments that you've really been craving, but you didn't even know that you needed to get outside your own head for.
Right. Wow. That's awesome. It's, again, I'm always amazed how things come to pass. Like, just a simple, client of yours or a friend was asking you, how would you do this? You're the coach.
Right.
And
oh yeah.
Yeah. So when did you realize that you were going to maybe create this journal and actually publish it and all that?
Probably a couple of weeks later after, because the thing that it had actually reminded me of myself is that before my son was born, I always had a blog. I always had some sort of writing project that I was working on.
Yeah.
And, he was still young enough. And I also had another kid, my older kid. I still wasn't quite ready to commit to a blog, but I was like, I could do a journal. So it really helped me get back into feeling the space I had to really be creative again. And I think that a lot of us do this at various points of our lives. We lose whatever creative juice that we had or our passion projects. And sometimes we just need permission to go back to them.
Yeah. Well, and I know one of the questions you look at and you help your clients is, understanding like, why does school not prepare us for the real world? I mean, you've done some schooling, obviously, but you're obviously living life outside of that in the real world, we would say. Why do you think school doesn't prepare us for that?
I think school doesn't prepare us for that because it is too focused on managing the herd. I think that when if you think back, I don't know whether you have kids.
I have 4 kids.
So you'll probably I find myself doing this with my children. Even though I catch myself, I'm sure your parents did this. If you had a report card with 3 A's and a C, the thing that your parents, your teachers are going to focus on is that C, and usually the message is going to be some form of, you need to try harder. And that's ignoring the fact that, they got A's in all of these other classes or B's or whatever. Why is it they need to try harder? Why aren't I teaching differently? Or why isn't the teacher approaching this in a different way?
Wow.
And I think that we really get stuck on feeling like we need to be a perfectionist in everything and focusing on that one thing we didn't do well. Whereas, that one thing you didn't do well, really, if you didn't do well in math, there's a basic level of math you need to be a functioning adult. Sure.
Exactly. Right.
But quite frankly, even if you didn't hit that, and you really embraced your talents in other ways and hired a CPA, it wouldn't be the end of the world.
Exactly.
And I think that then we carry on that lesson throughout our adulthood because, if you're looking at the other person's paper, you're cheating. If you if you ask for help and your teacher's overwhelmed with the other 25 kids, they're going to tell you, well, just try harder or figure it out yourself. And so then we take those lessons as an adult and we think that we have to do it all ourselves, or we have to figure it out all ourselves, or we should be able to figure it out all ourselves. And I think that really misses the human experience. I think that back in, 2000 years ago, when you were like apprenticed to someone, or you were learning from your parents, you were learning side by side. And so often we're not really learning side by side. And I think that as an adult, like valuing that side by side learning, valuing taking the experience of someone who is a little further ahead, it almost feels like cheating. And I hear so many younger people, especially, say, oh, I wish I had a mentor. And it's like, well, what are you doing to get a mentor? And none of them, literally none of them will be like, oh, well, I've done this, this, and this. And they've all said no. It's always like, oh, no, I want a mentor to offer to help me. And it's like, well, take some control over it. And I think that that's it. School does not teach us to have control over our own agency, our own destiny.
Wow. Very well said. And I think you nailed it on the head. I with my clients that I'm dealing with, kind of the same thing. Like, what are you actually doing to make that a reality? And you're right. It's typically nothing. And it's like, what, do you want a mentor to just fall into your lap? No, you've got to go make that happen. And I love that. And I love that approach that you're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And I would imagine that's kind of what this clarity journal helps with, is to kind of help you start putting some action items towards what you say you really want. Is that correct?
It is. It really starts out with doing the deep dive into figuring out what your strengths are, what's going well in your life. It's really ends up at the end with what are the action steps, because I think the action steps are hard to take when you're still uncertain.
Right.
And I think that sometimes we fall into just do it. Like, oh, well, I kind of have this idea, I should just do it. And it's like, well, you're really going to have a hard time. You're going to struggle if you're not really 100% sure, because if you're not 100% sure, then you just doing it is probably going to be wasted work, because you're going to end up pivoting.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. So most of us then with that, we're stuck, right? If I'm not putting effort in getting a mentor in my life, I'm stuck basically. So how do you help people become unstuck? I mean, you mentioned a few things already, but is there more to it than that?
I think it's really recognizing that you can fill up your time with anything. I'll talk about like the cell phone. It's addictive. Like, we don't ever need to sit with our thoughts the way we did even 50 years ago. 50 years ago, if you were sitting in line at a grocery store, you were just sitting in line in a grocery store. You weren't like scrolling through Instagram or like responding to the latest ridiculous tweet.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that we miss so much that time to just sit and be with ourselves. And even our like self-care routines oftentimes aren't doing that. Like, we do yoga, or we meditate, or we go for a jog. But all of those things, like usually people that are going for a jog have headphones on. When you're meditating, you're actively trying to not be thinking,
Right.
And so to actually spend time with yourself in whatever way, one of the reasons why I love the Clarity Journal is because, and it's going to sound really silly, but I remember in like drug prevention class in high school, one of the teachers mentioning that if you are trying to quit smoking, that you should always like have a pen or something to fidget with in your hand, because it'll keep you from wanting to pick up the cigarette. You're just used to having the habit of something in your hand. Well, I think there is a huge analog with our phones. We just literally always have them in our hands. So the nice thing about journaling is that you have the pencil in your hand, you have the book in front of you, and you're actually physically writing. And I think that helps curb that compulsive, oh, I'm stuck for 30 seconds. I'm going to pick up my phone and distract myself.
Ooh. Now that is a big issue, don't you think? I mean, do you see that with your clients, that the phone becomes this, I feel uncomfortable, so I'm grabbing the phone.
Yeah,
right?
I'm a late millennial. I mean, I see it in myself.
Yeah, I'm guilty of it too.
It's like, hi, my name is Becca. I've had a cell phone for 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think you touch a really sensitive point right now. And I had this 8th grade girl I'm working with. She's in 8th grade. And I asked her, how much time do you spend on social media every day? And she took a guess. She was like, maybe an hour and a half. And I go, do you want to look? She goes, sure. So she pulls it up, eyes get really big. And I go, what does it say? She says, 7.5 hours a day. It's a full-time job. And so I think you touch a really good and important point. So elaborate more on that, and maybe what we could do to be better in that.
So I think that, it's going to be a struggle, right? Like 7.5 hours a day. When you started telling that story, I was like, oh, it's going to be high. Yeah. And I don't want to do that same experiment for myself right now. So please don't look. But I think that part of it is actually, really embracing like kind of the essence of mindfulness. Like to me, the essence of mindfulness is actually noticing what's going on at any given moment. And even if you don't feel strong enough to change that right now, even noticing it, even at the act of looking up and finding out that you've had 7.5 hours on social media, as long as you don't push it away, what ends up happening is you tell that girl that, and if she has a shame response, or, if she feels bad about it, she might push that knowledge away and try to ignore it long term. But like being able to like kind of get yourself gradually more able to sit with that discomfort and not just try to ignore it. I think that because we have the phone, it's so easy to ignore all of our problems, both big and small, until they blow up in our face.
Right. Yeah. Well, and would you agree that we learn the most in those difficult times, in those uncomfortable moments? Don't you think?
I think so. I really do.
Yeah.
When we let ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think it's a matter of being able to let ourselves before we hit like some sort of rock bottom crisis point. Because that happens too. And it's very unfortunate when it has to hit a crisis point.
Yeah. Right. Well, I know you do a lot of coaching with women specifically, and you're really helping them. A lot of these women have children, right? How do you help these women, because there's a lot of moms that are listening to this right now who are busy with just kids in general. How can they ever maybe even achieve a goal or a dream that they may have outside of just being that mom, which by the way is very important. We know that. But how do they do that? What advice do you give in those areas?
I think the biggest advice is be patient with yourself. Okay. And I think that a lot of times moms feel further behind than they actually are. I've had some really interesting experiences around this. The US, at least in the US, people are much more willing to give moms a chance. Whereas like if I had a guy who had been unemployed for 3 years, it's the kiss of death. It's really hard to get him a job. And I had someone explain it to me that they just assumed the guy was in jail. And I was like, oh my gosh, that had not occurred to me, but maybe that's why I've had stay-at-home dads. And it's like, at first I was like, I can do this. I help stay-at-home moms all the time. Stay-at-home dads, it's really rough. But so any mom who's listening to this, it isn't that hard. And what you really want to do is just start small. Like, assuming that you're not in a crisis situation, like getting divorced or something, just really kind of just start focusing more on what you want and really allowing yourself to even think about that. Because I think for moms, they're so overloaded. They have so much emotional labor from all of the kids stuff. Even as the kids get older, there's still just a lot going on. It's really easy to put yourself last. But that ends up being really sad, because then I'll get women who are like in their late 50s or early 60s and just getting started trying to figure out what they want for their life. And if you're just doing the work of like really paying attention to what you want, then, maybe you take a freelance gig. Maybe you do something like do a part-time job. It's really easy to go from a part-time job to a full-time job. I mean, especially right now.
Right. Yeah,
But
that's true.
but even before, like, it's not, you don't have to be Wonder Woman. You don't have to be Superwoman. You just have to like be aware that you have to stay on the path moving forward, whatever that looks like to you right now.
Yeah.
And it can be small. It really can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Great advice. That's wonderful. So what, obviously you've got this clarity journal that you're doing, you're coaching people. What does a day look like for you though? Like, what do you do in a day, and what do you do to kind of keep yourself centered and in the moment?
Well, I do meditate most
Okay.
days. Not every day. But I am a big believer in meditating for however long it feels good to you.
Yeah.
I learned how to meditate when I was 12,
Okay.
and I learned from a 13-year-old girl. I was
Oh,
living
wow.
I was living in New Jersey, and this Californian girl came and stayed with an aunt, I think, in my neighborhood, and we ended up hanging out for a week or two. I don't really remember anything besides thinking she was the coolest thing ever. She had really long blonde hair.
Right.
She talked like a valley girl. She was just like really cool. And one day we were sitting talking, and she told me that she had, I think, a Buddhist monk come into her school and teach meditation. And basically all she said was, you sit cross-legged, you put
Uh-huh.
your hands on your knees, and you follow your breath in and you follow your breath out. And
And there
I
you are.
and there you are. Like, there didn't need to be a 300 like page book. It didn't
Right.
need to be a $3,000 like workshop.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that also it didn't need a ton of rules, So I'm cute little geeky science girl, and I'm like, I want to be like Luke Skywalker. So I started doing, I started
Yeah. Right.
meditating.
Wow.
And I think that it really was a helpful experience for me, because
Mm-hmm.
it taught me how to do it without worrying about any rules or whether I was
Okay.
doing it right or whatnot.
Right. Yeah.
So I would say find the thing that can help you gain that state. For a lot of people, that state is found when they're running. And if you find that state when you're running, maybe turn off the headphones for a little while just so that you can
Yeah.
actually be with yourself.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of it, because really meditation is a flow experience.
Yep.
And there are a lot of flow experiences. It's a slightly different flow experience. I'm sure someone's going to comment, but your brain waves are not,
Right. Yeah.
but all of it really helps refresh and energize us. And the more that we can focus on that and really keep bringing ourselves back. But it's hard when you have kids. Like, I was not great at meditating every day when my kids were small. Like, I'll
Sure.
be
Yeah.
the first to admit
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. For sure.
I think that it's also about self-compassion and
Yeah.
really like not doing things because you like are desperate. Like, I think that we also have a lot of, like, especially women have a lot of messages from media. Like, oh, you're stressed out, go get a box of chocolates or go get
Yeah.
wine with friends. And that's like out of desperation. That's like oh God, I need this because I'm so stressed out.
Yeah. Right.
Whereas this should come from like a self-compassionate,
Mm.
nurturing
Yeah. I love that.
space. And that's the space that where you're going to really where it's going to really feel good and actually fill you up.
Wow. And then I would imagine, obviously you're the creator of the Clarity Journal. Do you use those techniques every day in your life as well?
I don't use them every day. I
Yeah.
tend to use them when I start noticing I'm getting short with my family.
Okay.
Because when I'm starting to get short with my family or with other people, that's because I'm starting to lose connection with myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I use that as a warning sign that I need to kind of pull back and figure out what's going on.
Gotcha. So, what as a coach, what do you think you see as the biggest maybe roadblock in people's lives that you're noticing when you're coaching? And like, what's holding people back the most, do you think?
I think staying in bad situations.
Okay.
Because it's really hard to do all of this if you're in a really crappy job that you're in 50
Yeah.
hours a week. There's just no
Yeah.
way around it.
That's a good point.
And I think that we stay in those situations for entirely too long. I get people so often who'll be like, oh, well, I can't leave my job now. I hate it. I hate how it's run, but I like my coworkers and I can't let them down. So I need to stay until the end of this project. Well, and then lo and behold, the next project starts up before the last project finishes. And so now they have to push it back out another 6 months. And you're not putting yourself first. And at a very real level, you have to put your oxygen mask on first. You need to have a job or a situation that at the very least isn't stressing you out to the point that you're damaging your health.
Yeah. So you got to kind of know when you are in that job that's not serving you. Right. And then maybe I think where that clarity journal comes in, it helps you actually get more clarity or vision of where you want to go and what career would actually make you feel like you're getting out of bed with a purpose. Is that accurate?
I think that once you start noticing that you're unhappy,
Yeah.
it becomes easier to prioritize yourself, your happiness, and also your purpose. Like, I think sometimes when people talk about happiness, it sounds very like light and fluffy and unrigorous, but like it actually is deep. And your happiness is really all you have. And so really pay attention to what you're sacrificing, because even sacrificing for the kids at a certain level, there becomes a tipping point where you're sacrificing so much that you are no longer showing up to be the person you want to be.
Oh, wow. Very well said. Great advice. So let me ask you this. Why is honesty so important?
Because if you can't be honest with yourself, if you can't be honest with others, you're going to stay stuck, because honesty is at the root of figuring out what you want.
Yeah. Wow. You know, in my field, I work with a lot of recovering drug addicts and alcoholics. And one of the promises I'll give them is if they're honest with themselves, they'll never relapse. And I found that to be the exact case. And so that's why, you know, I know you're a big believer in that, and that's what you teach your clients. But you're right, you can never change. You'll always stay stuck, like you mentioned, if we can't just be brutally honest at times with ourselves, right?
Right. Well, and self-compassionately honest. I think sometimes self-compassion ends up turning into excuse making. And that's the part that really holds you back. Yeah.
So let me ask you this, and we may have already clarified that, but do you just coach women or do you coach men as well?
I work with probably about 2/3 women and about 1/3 men.
Okay. Yeah.
So I usually work
with younger kids, or
not with kids.
Okay.
I have definitely worked with college students.
Okay. So young adults.
So some of my favorite clients I've been working with since they were in college, and now they're like, actually have like really full-blown careers. And I've worked with them through a couple different job searches, figuring out like kind of what the path is for them. Because even if I think one other like kind of trap we fall into is that our work lives are no longer like the 1950s. I mean, everyone can agree with that.
Yeah.
And yet sometimes we talk about like life purpose, like we're in the 1950s. Like we're going to find the one thing that is going to be perfect. And then that's what we're going to do until we retire in 10, 20, 40 years from now. And that's just not realistic. Like what we are doing, what jobs are available just keeps changing too rapidly, first of all. But also, anyone listening to this podcast is interested in growth and human development and for themselves. And, there are people out there that, aren't that interested in maximizing themselves. They're just kind of, punching the clock.
Yeah.
And God bless, like, that's cool. You do you. But
Right.
most of those people probably aren't listening. So I'm not going to talk to them. I'm going to talk to the people who really do want to have purpose and momentum. And if you want to have purpose and momentum, you have to recognize that whatever answer you come up with for yourself today is probably only going to last 2 to 3 years, because in 2 to 3 years, whatever you're doing today is going to get boring. You're going to get used to doing it. It's not going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
And, and we all thrive on that kind of creative challenge.
Yeah.
And you can't have momentum if you're doing the same thing over and over again. Now, there are jobs like mine. Like I also like writing. So that's a challenge, but also coaching can be a challenge because I'm dealing with different people in different industries every day. But you're going to have to really recognize that if you're doing the same thing over and over again every day, once you master it, you're going to want to move on to the next thing. And what ends up happening, if you're not aware of that, if you're not mindful of it, then what happens in 2 to 3 years, you've gotten the new job today, 2 to 3 years, you're like, this is boring, or this isn't maximizing me. I don't like this. Why am I not getting a promotion? And you personalize so much that your boss hasn't promoted you, or your boss's boss hasn't promoted you.
Right.
And you stay too long. And it's just like, no, you know what? I need a creative challenge and I need growth. And this company just at this point can't give me the growth I need. That's not because they don't value me. That's because that's not what their business is. Their business isn't maximizing you. Their business is maximizing their profits.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Or if they're a nonprofit, like their business is helping other people or whatever, but their business isn't to self-actualize their employees.
Gotcha.
And I think it's really important to recognize that doesn't have to be personal. And the longer you stay in a situation, once you've hit that tipping point, the more upset you're going to be about it. But also, like, it's easy to fix it. You don't actually need to stay in there.
Gotcha. Very well said. You mentioned that you love writing. Do you have any plans for another book or?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of writing my next book. Nice. It's called Mindful Procrastination. If you want to be notified when it comes out, there is on my website a place that you can fill it in so that you can.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, but and that's really all about kind of I think that when we start talking about procrastination, a lot of times we beat ourselves up instead of really allowing mindfulness to really shine the light on why you're procrastinating in the first place and help yourself develop ways of moving through that aren't reflexively built on shame or on negative self-talk.
Wow. Beautiful. I can't wait to have our listeners check out this new book coming out. Any other big plans you may have that you could share with us, or you just
writing books?
Yeah.
Writing books and making sure my kids stay alive.
Well, those are very important things for sure. I want to ask you this. If there's someone listening to you right now, Becca, who is stuck, you've already given us some great advice already, but if there's one person listening to your voice at this very moment, what would you tell them, that one person who's struggling? What could you tell them right now?
You deserve clarity.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. I mean, that's a mic drop right there.
And I think that sometimes we don't really recognize that we actually deserve this and it's our right to find it.
Wow. That's beautiful. I love it. Well, if people want to reach out to you, Becca, and they want to maybe use you as a coach, or if they want to get, they want to learn more about you and then maybe find out how to get the Clarity Journal. And then obviously when your new book comes out, to be on that list when it comes out, what's the best way for them to do that?
So you can find the Clarity Journal on Amazon, and you can reach me at beccaribbing.com. So it's BECCARIBBING, and I'm sure it'll be in the show notes.
Yep, absolutely. We'll put all of that, all your links in the show notes. And and that. But again, I'm really impressed with what you're doing. I love how your own challenges growing up have led to you actually not only resolve them in your own life, but now you're helping others around you. And I just really am impressed with what you do and how you live your life. It's really fun to get to know you a little bit better here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so awesome to have you on the show. Well, guys, thank you for tuning in once again. I told you this was going to be great. Becca Ribbing, please check her out. Like I said, we'll have all her links in her show notes. I love what she just said there at the very end. And when she said it, I'm like, man, I need to say that to myself too. We all deserve clarity. And the Clarity Journal, she's the author of that. Please check it out. Again, thanks for tuning in, guys. And Becca, one last time, thank you so much for being here with us today.